Before we go on, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe to Major Tom's Tales so you never miss stories like this one. Claire Morgan's target commander watched through his scope the unthinkable round that had just taken out his spotter and murmured into the radio, "You're her." Staff Sergeant Claire Morgan had lived her life in the shadow of a figure the military always avoided mentioning. He was a sniper, so deadly enemy fighters nicknamed him the Ghost, and American commanders acted like he didn't exist. She carried his rifle, his notebook, and a way of shooting no instructor ever quite explained. One single round in the Hindu Kush would make everyone finally speak his name. Staff Sergeant Claire Morgan was 28 and had been deployed to eastern Afghanistan for 4 months when the mission brief arrived on her desk. She stood 5'8", with a lean frame, and hands that never trembled, even when everything around her unraveled. Her eyes were pale gray, the sort that seemed to look through things rather than at them. At that moment, she sat in a plywood operations center at Combat Outpost Herrera, studying a satellite image of a valley where 3 American patrols had been ambushed over the last 6 weeks. The briefing officer, Captain Vaughn, told the room that enemy forces in the area were being led by a highly skilled commander who used terrain and timing to devastating effect. Intelligence suggested he had formal military training, possibly from abroad, and that he personally led sniper teams responsible for the deaths of 11 American soldiers in the past 2 months. The mission was simple: find him and remove the threat. Claire had been assigned to a specialized sniper element attached to the 10th Mountain Division. She was the kind of quiet who made people forget she was there until she spoke. And when she did speak, it usually shifted the whole conversation. Her rifle was an M210 enhanced sniper rifle, a bolt-action in .300 Winchester Magnum with an effective reach beyond 1,200 meters. It had belonged to another man before her, someone the Army preferred not to discuss. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe to Major Tom's Tales so we can keep sharing these stories. Claire grew up in rural Montana on land that backed up to the national forest. Her father died when she was 6. Her mother remarried when Claire was 8 to a man named Jack Morgan. Jack had been an Army sniper who served in multiple classified operations in the 90s and early 2000s. He never spoke about his service at length, but Claire knew he carried scars he wouldn't show and a reputation he couldn't escape. He began teaching her to shoot at 10, not with the gentle lessons most kids get, but the hard lessons of a world where missing could mean dying. He taught her to read the wind by watching dust sweep across open ground, to judge range by comparing objects she knew, and to control her breathing until her pulse dimmed. By 14, she could ring targets at 700 yards and compensate for variables faster than many trained marksmen. Jack told her shooting was patience and math, but being a sniper was about understanding how to turn an enemy's fear into a tool. He said the best shooters weren't those who fired the most rounds, but those who waited for the right shot at the right moment and made everyone else too afraid to move. He taught her fear could be a weapon you wield without pulling the trigger. When Claire was 17, Jack died. The official version called it a heart attack, but in his things she found hints that suggested otherwise. Encrypted notes, letters with names blacked out, and a journal with detailed entries about shot placement and enemy behavior no civilian should have known. She also found the rifle, an M24 rebarreled and heavily customized during his service years, and she kept it all at home. She enlisted at 19, went infantry, and applied to the U.S. Army sniper course at Fort Benning. After her first deployment, she graduated at the top of her class. Instructors said she shot like someone with 20 years of experience, but when asked who had trained her, she only said her stepfather. They never pushed further. The mission brief went on. Captain Vaughn explained the enemy commander operated from a network of ridgelines and caves in the Kandura Valley. He moved constantly, never stayed in one place longer than 48 hours, and used local fighters as spotters while keeping himself out of direct contact. American forces had launched multiple attempts to find him, and every one had come up empty. All of those efforts had failed. Captain Vaughn turned to Claire and asked if she had any ideas. She leaned over the satellite imagery and the attack timeline with a careful eye. She wondered aloud whether there were patterns tied to time of day, weather, or the moon. Vaughn said intelligence had already checked those angles and found nothing actionable. One of the others in the room, Staff Sergeant Hale, argued they needed more boots on the ground instead of more analysis. Claire didn't argue back. She requested copies of every after-action report and every recorded sighting of the enemy commander or his network. Vaughn handed them over. That night, she spread the reports across the floor of her tent and opened Jack's journal. She had brought that journal through 3 deployments and still learned from it. Jack used to say every shooter left a signature, a pattern in position choice, timing, and extraction. He told her you couldn't find the signature until you stopped treating events as isolated and started seeing the system beneath them. Claire began mapping the attacks exactly like Jack had mapped insurgent movements in Iraq 15 years earlier. By Oro 400, she saw the pattern. The enemy commander wasn't random. He rotated based on natural light, moon phase, and the schedules of American supply convoys. He was predictable. He just didn't realize it yet. Claire sat alone amid maps and reports and thought about Jack. He had told her the hardest part of being a sniper wasn't the shot, but the waiting. The long still hours when your mind whispers that you're wasting time or that the enemy is smarter than you. He also said doubt was poison. Once you doubted the plan, you handed the enemy an edge. The only path to victory, he said, was to trust your prep, trust your skill, and trust that the man at the other end of the scope didn't know you were there until it was too late. She pulled out the M2010 and field and stripped it in the dark from pure muscle memory. She had done the sequence 1,000 times. Jack's M24, the one she kept at home, felt the same in her hands, the weight and balance identical. He had made her strip and reassemble it, blindfolded, so she could do it under any condition, and he told her a rifle was just metal and wood until you made it part of yourself. She thought about the enemy commander. Somewhere in those mountains a man believed himself invisible. He had killed 11 Americans and wounded twice that many. He moved like a ghost, stayed ahead of every operation, and probably thought he was untouchable. Claire wasn't trying to prove him wrong with words. She planned to prove it with a single bullet. The next morning, Claire presented her analysis to Captain Vaughn. She explained the commander rotated through 5 primary observation points on a cycle tied to moon phase and convoy schedules. She said the next likely window was in 72 hours during a resupply convoy on a stretch of road he'd hit twice before. If they emplaced a counter-sniper team early and kept radios silent, they could be waiting when he arrived. Vaughn asked how confident she was. She said 80%. He said that wasn't a certainty. She replied that nothing in war was certain, but this was their best shot. Hale protested that sending a small team into the mountains on guesswork wasted resources and risked lives if the intel was wrong. Claire said people were already dying for nothing. At least this gave them a chance to stop it. Vaughn greenlit the operation. 36 hours later, Claire moved out with Corporal Reese and a small security element. They inserted at night via helicopter, dropped 3 kilometers from the target, and moved on foot through rocky terrain that climbed steeply into the ridgelines. The trek took 8 hours. They reached the position Claire had selected, a rock formation overlooking a narrow valley where the road twisted through switchbacks and offered clear sight across 900 meters of open ground, and then they waited. The first day was quiet. The second saw a patrol through the valley draw scattered small arms fire, but no sniper engagement. On the third day, just after dawn, Claire spotted movement on the opposite ridgeline. 2 men, one with a scoped rifle, the other with a spotting scope and a radio. They settled into a position that gave them a perfect angle on the road below, where the convoy was due in 30 minutes. Claire steadied her breath and studied the 2 shapes through her scope. The range read 870 meters. Wind was mild, shifting from the west at 6 to 8 miles per hour. The morning sun hung low behind her, glaring straight into their faces if they dared look her way. She was perched 50 meters higher than her targets. Corporal Reese read the wind again and confirmed the distance. Claire dialed in her scope and settled into her shooting posture. The 2 men were setting up, preparing to ambush the convoy. The one with the rifle moved like an old professional. Measured, confident, practiced. Claire observed him for half a minute and recognized the motion pattern. He arranged himself exactly as Jack once had. Body turned at an angle, legs tucked, rifle resting on a natural support with almost no exposure. It was a signature. She let out half a breath, slowed her pulse, and waited. The spotter leaned forward to adjust his scope, and for 2 seconds their bodies aligned within 18 inches. Claire squeezed the trigger. The round struck the spotter in the upper chest. She cycled the bolt in one fluid motion, reacquired the second target as he started to react, and fired again. The bullet hit center mass. He went down. She stayed on the scope. No movement. Reese confirmed 2 enemies down. Moments later, the radio back at the operations center intercepted a faint voice on an enemy frequency speaking English with a Russian accent. "You're her." Claire keyed her mic and reported 2 enemy combatants down, giving their grid coordinates to command. A quick reaction team arrived an hour later and confirmed both were dead. The rifle was a Dragunov SVD. The spotter carried a Chinese optic and a radio. But it was the notebook in the shooter's pack that changed everything. Pages of notes on American patrols, convoy routes, and sniper hides, written in English with Russian side marks. There were also maps laid out with the same analytic method Jack used years ago. Intelligence sent the evidence up the chain. Within days, signals and biometric data proved the shooter was a former Russian military sniper who had trained insurgents in Afghanistan for 2 years. He'd been linked to at least 30 coalition deaths across 3 provinces. In the back of his notebook was a single page listing names. One of them, Jack Morgan. Claire returned to base and was debriefed by intelligence officers who wanted every detail. She gave them the distance, the wind, the shot sequence, the confirmation. They asked how she'd predicted the enemy's position. She said she studied the pattern. They asked if anyone had taught her that method. She said yes. Who? They pressed. A man named Jack Morgan. The room went silent. One officer left and came back 20 minutes later holding a folder stamped sensitive. He explained that Jack Morgan had been a decorated Army sniper active in classified missions during the Balkan conflict and later in Iraq. Rumor inside intelligence circles said he'd achieved an extraordinary number of confirmed kills, though no numbers were ever released. He'd also been investigated several times for disobeying orders, acting outside command lines, and conducting unauthorized operations that resulted in enemy deaths without approval. He was never formally charged, but was quietly pushed out of service. His file sealed, his existence denied. Claire asked why the Russian sniper carried Jack's name in his notebook. The officer said follow-up intel suggested Jack had killed the man's brother during a 1999 mission in Chechnya. The Russian had hunted him for years without success. When Jack died, the man shifted to killing American snipers, hoping to find one connected to him. He found his answer, but it cost him his life. Claire was recommended for a Bronze Star with V device for valor. The medal was approved within months and awarded at a ceremony attended by officers who had never heard Jack's name spoken officially. She kept deploying, kept operating, and kept using the lessons Jack had drilled into her. Other snipers began asking how she read terrain and time so well. She told them exactly what Jack had taught her: patience, pattern recognition, and the knowledge that every enemy, no matter how skilled, runs on a system. The one who decodes it first always wins. She held on to Jack's journal and his M24. Sometimes she opened it and reread his thoughts on patience, fear, and how one bullet can change everything. He might have been erased from the records, but his methods lived in every shot she took and every life she saved. That was the legacy that mattered, not the medals or recognition, but the fact that the work endured, and that those who came after would be stronger because someone before them refused to quit.